Welcome to the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Design Studio. I'm Lisa Pavelka. You know, a lot of people ask me a question about my Magic-Glos. Can you use it in an open, backless setting? And you can. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that to make layered collages in open settings. Now, what you can see here is I've got a few that come from Fire Mountain, but there's so many more to choose from. But it all works the same way regardless of the setting, and we start with a little bit of scrap clay, or you can just use regular clay, and then I mix it up and it turns into this gray color, which really doesn't matter, but we just need a layer of scrap clay rolled out on our clay machine. It doesn't have to be too thick, but what you're going to want to have is a small craft mirror or a tile, or I've got a little piece of glass. This was an insert in from a picture frame. And then you're going to want painter's tape. Painter's tape is the best tape to use for this technique because it's a low adhesion type of tape. So I've cut some out, and the reason we use the scrap clay, it's a little bit difficult to get your piece to be backed by the tape when you just put it on a surface that the tape doesn't stick to. So that scrap clay acts as almost like tape for the tape, if you will. And we're going to take our setting and place it down, and with something flat, it can be another tile or piece of glass, or it can just be a box. We're going to use it to press these all down into the clay so everything sits nicely. Now we start with the Magic-Glos, and you really want to use very, very little amount for this first layer. Start in the middle, and with a toothpick or a beading awl or a needle tool, you can spread it around. Now this first layer we're creating a crust, if you will. So we barely want enough to fill in the size of our bezel, very, very thin, because even with the tape holding there, you can see this particular bezel has texture. It's got a hammered finish, so it doesn't lay really flat against the tape, meaning there might be little tiny areas where there's openings between the edge of the bezel and the underside of it. So we don't want the resin to come pouring out underneath it. Also, we start with a very thin layer because we want to maybe build up a layer or two of our inclusions before we start our other layers that give it the finishing touch. Now, with that in mind, I love to go shopping through all of my findings, steampunk parts. We've got a whole bunch here. The watch parts, it can be tiny little charms and embellishments. Even the steampunk components that I create using polymer clay. And if you're curious about how to do those, be sure to check out my video on Steampunk Factory, and you'll learn how to make your own steampunk parts. But for now, what we're going to start with, I like to design using the biggest components I want, and anything with any dimension or thickness usually goes towards the middle. We don't want anything too high, because remember, you want to cover that with resin. So I'm just going to start here with one of these larger components, and I like to use diamond tweezers for my work. And you can take your time and shift things around and move it around and design it any way you like. One thing to keep in mind, if you're not going to embed a suspension method, which I'll show you how to do that, you might want to drill a hole to hang your piece from using a jump ring or a pinch bail. So keep in mind what might be the top portion of your design, and also where you might need to leave an opening to drill through after the Magic-Glos cures. So we'll just do one more little piece in here, but I don't try to fill up the whole area in the first step. And even when I come back to add more pieces later, let's take a look at that. I don't want to fill up that whole area either because I like to add that certain je ne sais quoi. We're going to work with something sparkly to fill in our background. So into the UV light it goes for about 5 minutes is all you need. Even if the Magic-Glos is still tacky to the touch, it doesn't matter. We can go and add our second layer. So here I've got one that I've already cured, and what I want to do now is just add a little bit of Magic-Glos, and we're using it like glue. We don't need to cover the whole piece. And I can move my parts around as I need it by dipping it in the Magic-Glos first and then placing them. If you have too much Magic-Glos on the surface, these teeny tiny little components can migrate. They can be floating. You can set them in one place and then you'll bring it out of the UV light or the sun only to find that they've floated across your piece to somewhere you didn't necessarily want them. So I might just add a few of the smaller pieces here. like so. And it can be a combination of different elements that you like, but this one is purely steampunk with the vintage watch parts. So that might be where I want to go. And then that would go into a light, 5 minutes or so. We'd bring it out, and then we'd add another layer from the middle and drag it all the way out to the edges and the surface. So let's put this one into the light. Okay. And this is one where I finished the top, dragging the Magic-Glos all the way across the surface, adding enough to self-level and bring it all the way to the layers. It's really important to do all the layers you want from the front, because there's a danger when we remove this of that whole crust coming out if it's not more stable with Magic-Glos finished all the way to the edges. So when it's like this, we're going to just gently lift it off the scrap clay and slowly peel this back. Now the back of this might still be goopy. You can see the Magic-Glos hasn't cured against the tape. And don't be alarmed, that's normal. So the back of this might even be a little bit dull looking. Don't worry about that either. You would just put it in the light and cure that if you like, or we can jump right to the next step, and that's finishing from the back. Now sometimes in an open setting I will design and put components on the front and the back, but I want to do something that's going to add a little flair to my piece. So with another small cure surface, anything that you can stick a piece of scrap clay to, we're going to raise this up on a pedestal. That allows me to keep it level and check to make sure it's level when I add my Magic-Glos. It allows me to make sure to rotate, make sure that I've got the resin all the way where I want it. And if by chance I'm a little bit too ambitious and I add too much of my Magic-Glos and it overflows, it's going to go underneath and I can just cure the top for a few minutes, come to the bottom and clean it up, and then I don't have to worry about any problems. But we're going to use the ice resin opals and the Magic-Glos to create a really interesting background that's going to highlight and frame all of our elements. So with a piece of parchment paper or scrap paper, and I'm just going to take the end of a bead scoop here, you usually don't need a lot of these opals, just a tiny little bit. You can always add more if you need it. And then a few drops of Magic-Glos. So whenever you're mixing an inclusion like this, whether it's a powder or a glitter or a fiber, you don't want to pour the Magic-Glos right on top because it can just go poof everywhere. And again, start with less Magic-Glos than you think you need. And with a needle tool or toothpick, you can just start blending this all together. And it makes a bit of a paste consistency. You can decide if you want it a little thicker and have a little bit more color, or thinner and just be a suggestion or a hint of your inclusions. Now the beautiful thing about Magic-Glos is once it dries, it's permanent, it's waterproof. But when it's not cured, you can clean up your tools with a baby wipe or a paper towel. So I really like the consistency here. Sometimes I have to go back and add a few drops of Magic-Glos, or perhaps it's too runny and I go back in and add a little bit more of the glitter. But I'm going to pick it up with my tool, and let's bring it right back up over here. And again, we're just going to put it in the middle. It doesn't matter that the underlying layer of the Magic-Glos was still goopy. It's going to cure right through this next layer. And you're going to just keep adding it and spreading it until you've covered the whole area. You can bring it right up to the edges, or you can leave it just inside the edges of your bezel setting. It depends on the design you want. You're probably not going to be seeing it from the back anyway. You can also choose to leave your pieces completely transparent. That's another option I like to do with my open bezel setting creations that I do with Magic-Glos. So just spread it around until you're happy and it's even. Now some of you may be familiar with my tip for using the butane torch. You notice for bubbles, that pops bubbles. Notice I haven't done that so far. First of all, I don't want to do it when it's sitting over the tape. Even though I do it for 1 quick second, it's a bit of a fire hazard. We don't want to set anything on fire. And then secondly, I don't want to do that until it's raised up, but we really don't need to. We're working in such thin layers that bubbles typically aren't a problem. So by now, this is ready just to bring this one out, and I can work on that, and we'll bring that one back in. But we've already seen how to work with that in the next step. So now, what I've done was I put a piece of steampunk in there. If you want to do a suspension, you might choose a larger piece of steampunk. You can even use a charm with a jump loop on it or anything with a hole. And before you put it in, you can just embed that piece of steampunk so that it's a way to suspend your piece when you're done. You might even do it from both ends so that you have a place to either suspend it from side to side, or you might add some dangles, some charms or crystals. There's really so many creative opportunities with this concept. But as you can see, we're finished from the front. From the back, it's a little rough, and this piece might come out. Some people might like the roughness. I like to have that smooth, rounded cabochon effect, like it's a real piece of glass. So we can go back to one of our tiles, and we can take some of our scrap clay. Now, when you make that pedestal, make sure that pedestal is smaller than the piece you're working on. Because if clay is sticking out around the edges and you do overflow, it's just going to pull the Magic-Glos and wick it away. So now our final layer, always adding from the middle, and again, I emphasize these tips because they're very important, and adding less than you think you need, because we can come back and add more, but it's hard to take it away. Now, this is really cool. You can see that this is all starting to run to one side. So that's the advantage of having that clay pedestal. It's not level. So now I can just go in and level it with my fingers and start spreading it around to my edges and rotating. Okay, and that point I can determine, do I have enough? Do I have enough roundness? Do I have enough to cover all the glitter? And I can tell, maybe hard to see on camera, that there's still glitter sticking out. But now that I've brought it out to my edges, and it's pulling in a little bit, so it may need another layer after this, but I think we can get it. I'm going to still add from the middle. Once you've worked with it for a little while, you learn very quickly how much you can add and how much is too much. And again, it's very easy to clean up if you've added too much, but you learn pretty much the tolerance of what Magic-Glos will do on an open setting very quickly. But don't panic. Just use some alcohol on a cotton wipe or cotton swab you can get from the drugstore, and that's how you can clean it up. But we've got this beautiful rounded cabochon finish on the back. It's coating all the glitter, so we've got a nice uninterrupted surface. And now, with one quick second, making sure I always ignite my butane torch away from me or anything that's flammable, we turn on the safety and we ignite. And so when I say I'm flashing this to check for bubbles, one quick second, I don't mean one Mississippi. I mean one. Ready? If there's bubbles, they'll pop this quick. Oh, I didn't really see one, but let's try that again. Nope, we're good here. So into the light it goes. The last little tip I want to share with you is, if you live in a sunny locale, California, Nevada, Arizona, some of you might be thinking, well, why do I need a UV light if I can cure it in the sun? Well, the sun's a great option, but if you're like me, I do most of my creating at night. Plus, don't forget, occasionally in places that are even hardly ever get rain, like Las Vegas where I live, there's the occasional cloudy day, and sometimes we do get rain, but even worse, there's the windy day. So remember, you need to choose your inclusions. They shouldn't be choosing you. You don't want to find bits of dust and leaves and grass and even bugs in your Magic-Glos unless that's what you want to put there. Well, I wish you all happy resining. Don't forget to share this with everybody you know on your favorite social network sites, including Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, and you know there's several more. Seems to be new ones every day. And come to firemountaingems.com to check out all the wonderful video and printed tutorials and tips available to you and your friends. Thanks for joining me.